A woman moved to a remote Australian island and mysteriously disappeared. The police quickly got involved and began untangling a strange web of clues revealing the dark secrets of the island. The situation was complicated by the fact that nothing like this had happened there in over 100 years, leaving the authorities completely unprepared. In the end, they managed to uncover a shocking truth, but with it came even more disturbing questions. Janelle Patton was born on June 30, 1972, in Sydney, Australia. She was an only child and her parents lavished all their love and attention on her. From a very young age, Janelle developed a passion for music. She played both the piano and clarinet and was active in her school's music group. After finishing high school, Janelle went to university to study medicine, but after just a year, she decided to drop out and focus on her career. She got a job at a bank and spent the next few years working her way up. Janelle started feeling that big city life, with all of its challenges and stresses, was taking a toll on her, and she began thinking about moving somewhere quieter. In October 1999, at 27 years old, Janelle decided to move to a small island called Norfolk. The island was nearly 1,000 miles from Australia. Back then, Norfolk had its own custom regulations and local laws, making it pretty independent from the mainland, but it was still considered part of the country. With a population of around 2,000, everyone in Norfolk knew each other, and because it was so isolated, new faces were rare, except for tourists. The island was a popular spot for visitors from both Australia and New Zealand, which was a bit closer. Janelle quickly found a job at a local hotel, got to know the island's residents, and eventually settled into their laid-back way of life. Norfolk felt like a small town, but with the added isolation of being surrounded by nothing but ocean for hundreds of miles. Because of that, locals really tried to get along. After all, they didn't have much choice. In late March 2002, a year and a half after moving, Janelle's parents decided to visit her for the first time, and she was really excited. They arrived on March 30th, and Janelle spent the whole day showing them around, introducing them to the island's main sights and the locals. The next day, Janelle had a morning shift at the hotel, so they planned to meet up as soon as she finished work. She had rented a small cottage on the property of a local woman, but it wasn't big enough to fit her parents. So, she booked them a room at a hotel. That morning, Janelle finished her shift around 11 a.m. and set off on her daily walk, something she did regularly. Her route was a short loop from her house to a lookout point at the edge of the island. Her parents expected her to stop by their hotel around noon, but Janelle was running late. At first, they figured she might have gotten caught up with something, so they decided to go for a walk themselves. Before they left, they wrote her a note and stuck it in the door, but when they got back around 2:30 p.m., the note was still there. Realizing that Janelle hadn't come by as planned, her parents started to worry. They tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. It was strange. How could their daughter disappear on such a small island? The thought that something might have happened to her began to creep in. They went to her cottage and found the front door unlocked. But on Norfolk, that wasn't unusual. People rarely locked their doors as crime was practically unheard of on the island. Inside, there was no sign of Janelle, and nothing suggested that anything bad had happened. Her car was also parked outside. While they were at the house, one of Janelle's friends showed up. When they told her they hadn't been able to reach Janelle all day, she suggested they check the route Janelle usually took for her daily walk. The three of them drove along the path, but there was no sign of her. After that, her parents returned to the hotel and informed the manager about what was going on. He made a few calls to people around the island, asking if anyone had seen Janelle, but no one had. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and her parents decided it was time to call the police. They explained that their daughter had been missing all day, and the officers asked them to come down to the station. The police informed Janelle's parents that, just an hour before their call, a tourist from New Zealand had discovered a body near a waterfall. She had spotted a large black bag and, upon getting closer, saw human hands sticking out from underneath it. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a woman's body, showing multiple visible injuries, and her clothes were partly missing. As Janelle's parents were speaking with the police, the officers had just begun processing the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim could be Janelle. To spare her parents from the trauma of identifying the body, the investigators asked Janelle's neighbor, the woman she rented the cottage from, to come to the scene. When she arrived, she immediately confirmed that the victim was indeed Janelle. The body was handed over to the medical examiners, but based on the initial assessment, it was clear that they were likely dealing with a murder. The news sent shockwaves through the island community. There hadn't been a murder on Norfolk since 1893, and even minor crimes were rare. The local police were used to handling nothing more serious than fights and domestic disputes, but now they were faced with a homicide investigation. Because of this, they decided to request assistance from Australian investigators who immediately flew to the island. The medical examiners found 64 injuries on Janelle's body, including bruises and cuts likely caused by a sharp object, possibly broken glass. Supporting this theory, they found glass shards in her hair, which they believed came from a broken bottle. In addition to the cuts, there were bruises on her wrists, suggesting someone had held her down while she was being attacked. This led the investigators to consider that there may have been more than one person involved in the murder. Alongside the cuts from the glass, there were also stab wounds, indicating a knife had been used in the attack as well. Forensic experts found microscopic traces of green and white paint on Janelle's body. These particles were also present on her clothing and in her hair. The experts believe that the paint might have come from the perpetrator or their vehicle, possibly during the disposal of her body. Although part of Janelle's clothing was missing, which initially pointed to a possible sexual motive, the forensic team found no signs of sexual assault. However, they did recover a foreign DNA sample from her body, but it belonged to an unidentified female. The investigation was further complicated by the fact that around 3:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, a brief but intense rainstorm swept across the island. This downpour may have washed away crucial evidence, such as footprints, blood, or other biological samples. However, the rain did help establish a timeline. There were puddles in the black plastic sheet covering Janelle's body, indicating that it had been left there before the rain started. This meant that Janelle had likely been dead and lying there for at least 3 hours before she was discovered. While the forensic experts were busy searching for clues, the police began piecing together the final hours of Janelle's life. They discovered that after finishing her shift, Janelle stopped by a store before heading home. Around the same time, her landlord arrived and saw Janelle leaving for her usual walk. About 10 minutes later, another local resident drove past Janelle on the road. The next person to see her lived near the end of that route and spotted Janelle standing next to a white car talking to the driver. According to the witness, she thought there were 2 men in the car but admitted it was possible there could have been only one. 5 minutes later, 2 more witnesses who lived close to the road reported hearing what sounded like a child crying in the distance. Another man said he heard a scream, but by the time he went outside to check, the noise had stopped. Based on this information, the police concluded that the attack on Janelle likely took place around 11:45 a.m., just half an hour after she had finished her shift. With no strong leads, the police sent the black plastic sheet that Janelle's body had been wrapped into the mainland for more advanced testing. Sometime later, the results came back. Forensic experts had found 10 different fingerprints on the sheet, but all of them were partially smeared. Despite this, the detectives decided to try matching the prints. They compiled a list of everyone who had been on the island the day of the murder, which amounted to more than 2,700 names, including both locals and tourists. The police asked all individuals between the age of 15 and 70 to voluntarily provide fingerprints and DNA samples, but only half complied. Out of 1,300 sets of fingerprints, the experts couldn't find a single match. With no results from the prints, the investigators decided to shift their focus to potential suspects among Janelle's acquaintances. Her diary proved to be a key source of information. It contained detailed entries about life on the island and her relationships with its residents. From the diary, police learned that Janelle had a strained relationship with one of her friends. When Janelle first moved to the island, this woman helped her find a temporary place to live at her friend's house. However, Janelle didn't stay there long, apparently due to some disagreements. But even after Janelle moved out, this man continued to act suspiciously. Several witnesses reported that he had once threatened Janelle in the middle of the street. Police also discovered that after her body was found, he asked a friend to provide him with an alibi and say that they spent the day together, even though it wasn't true. The reason behind his behavior remained unclear, but the police uncovered an interesting detail. It appeared that he was in a secret relationship with Janelle's friend, the one who had helped her with housing despite the fact that the woman was married with children. Janelle had written about their affair in her diary, and it was possible that the couple wasn't happy she knew about their secret. Despite this, both the man and the woman provided their fingerprints and neither matched those found on the plastic sheet. The police also searched their homes and cars, but found no incriminating evidence. The next suspect the police looked into was a man Janelle had been dating for 9 months. He, too, was investigated for possible involvement, but once again, the police couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. Janelle's diary also mentioned several other people with whom she had tense relationships, but all of them agreed to provide their fingerprints and DNA samples, and none of them matched. At one point, the police even considered Janelle's parents as suspects since the murder occurred the day after they arrived on the island, but this theory also led nowhere. Eventually, the investigation hit a dead end. 4 months, the police tried to identify new suspects and re-examine the existing evidence, but every lead turned into a dead end. They even announced a substantial reward of $300,000 for information about the case, but none of the tips brought them any closer to finding the killer. 2 years later, investigators reopened the case and decided to re-examine the fingerprint samples they had collected from locals and tourists. This time, they also included prints from suspects in other recent cases on the island. Since all the prints were stored on paper, experts had to compare them manually. The process took a while, but eventually detectives got a breakthrough call. The fingerprints of a suspect in another case matched 2 prints found on the black tarp used to wrap Janelle's body. That suspect was 26-year-old Glenn McNeil. Shortly after Janelle's murder, police had questioned him in connection with a home invasion, but he wasn't arrested. Despite this, they had taken his fingerprints, which had been stored with a case file ever since. Police also learned that in 2002, McNeil owned a white Honda, matching the description of the car a witness saw near Janelle just minutes before her death. Another curious fact was that McNeil had left the island shortly after the murder. He had moved to Norfolk from New Zealand in 2000 with his wife and worked as a chef, but they later divorced, which also happened around the time of his move from the island. At the time of the investigation, McNeil was living in New Zealand with his new wife and 2 children, which made it difficult for the police to question him. However, they realized that he likely hadn't taken his car off the island, so they decided to search for it, hoping forensic experts could examine it for evidence. Before long, they found it. The white Honda had been abandoned on someone's property, not far from his old house, overgrown with weeds. It was handed over to forensics and investigators got a warrant to search the house where McNeil had lived during his time on the island. When the experts thoroughly examined the car, they discovered traces of white and green paint that matched the paint particles found on Janelle's body. There were also a few glass shards, and similar fragments were found in his former home. An expert was called in to analyze the samples, and he confirmed that the glass shards from the car, the house, and the ones found on Janelle's clothes and body not only matched, but were produced at the same time for a specific type of product. He also discovered parts of an engraving on one of the shards, which turned out to be a name of a wine. This confirmed that all 3 sets of glass shards came from the same wine bottle. In the backyard of McNeil's former house, the police found a black tarp, exactly like the one used to wrap Janelle's body. They also discovered several human hairs and some biological traces in the trunk of his car. But unfortunately, both pieces of evidence had deteriorated over time, so the experts couldn't extract any DNA. Not giving up, detectives sent the hairs to a lab in the US, which had the most advanced technology at the time. But the process dragged on for a year. The first lab was overloaded and couldn't get to it right away. In the end, one of the detectives had to fly to the US to hand the samples to a different lab. Finally, in early 2006, the police got the result they were looking for. The hairs were confirmed to belong to Janelle. With all this evidence coming together, Detectives secured an arrest warrant and headed to New Zealand to take McNeil into custody. He was then extradited to Australia, where he was officially charged with Janelle's murder. During the first interrogation, McNeil, to the surprise of the detectives, started confessing right away. He claimed that on the morning of the murder, he smoked some weed and went for a drive around the island. At some point, he bent down to grab a pack of cigarettes, lost sight of the road, and hit something. At first, McNeil thought he'd run over an animal, but when he got out of the car, he saw a person lying underneath it. Panicking, he loaded the body into his trunk and drove home, where he spent hours using drugs. A while later, he started hearing noises coming from the trunk and realized the woman was still alive. That's when he grabbed a kitchen knife, opened the trunk, and stabbed her multiple times. After that, McNeil wrapped the body in a tarp and dumped it near the waterfall. Despite his confession, detectives knew immediately he was lying. Almost everything he said didn't match the facts. Medical examiners were sure the injuries Janelle had didn't line up with being hit by a car. Plus, McNeil's story didn't explain the bruises on her wrist, the cuts from glass shards, and why part of her clothing had been removed. And if he really had stabbed her in the trunk, there would have been blood traces there, something the forensic team would never have missed. But there were none. The police tried to get him to tell the truth, pointing out all the inconsistencies, but McNeil stubbornly stuck to his version. In the end, the case went to trial, which began in the summer of 2006. It was held on the island and the jury was selected from the local residents. At the first hearing, McNeil claimed he had nothing to do with the murder and even said he didn't remember giving any confession to the police. He blamed his memory lapse on supposed mental health issues, although there was no medical proof to back up his claims. But by the time the trial began, the detectives had dug up something interesting. They knew McNeil's defense team would focus on the fact that female DNA was found on Janelle's body. It wasn't just on her clothes, it was also under her fingernails, which suggested she might have scratched a woman in a struggle before she died. This raised the possibility that a woman was involved in the murder and could have jeopardized the whole case. After McNeil's arrest, the investigators questioned everyone who knew Janelle, asking if there was any connection between her and McNeil. One of her friends remembered something odd. Just 2 or 3 weeks before Janelle's death, she had asked her friend if she knew a woman named Alicia and her husband, Glenn McNeil. The friend replied that she didn't know them personally but had seen them around. Janelle didn't explain why she asked that and just changed the subject. This same friend also mentioned that on the day of the murder, she was working at a hotel and spotted Alicia outside acting weird. Alicia was covered in something red, and when the friend asked if everything was okay, Alicia, who seemed a bit shaken, simply said it was just paint and walked away. For some reason, the witness didn't think to tell the police about this at the time. She didn't realize it could be connected to Janelle's murder until detectives asked her about McNeil and his wife. Alicia was called to testify in court, but insisted she had nothing to do with the murder. We still don't know if the police compared her DNA with the female sample from Janelle's body. Interestingly, later on, Janelle's friend changed her testimony and claimed that a religious cult of 6 people was behind her murder. This revelation shocked investigators, casting doubt on all of her previous statements. As for McNeil, he continued to deny any involvement in the murder, still insisting he didn't remember confessing. But despite his claims, with all the evidence presented, the jury found him guilty. On March 9, 2007, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Even though the case seemed closed, many people continued to question whether McNeil was truly the killer. The most popular theory, based on witness statements and the nature of the injuries, suggested that he may not have acted alone. Either he killed Janelle with someone else, or helped someone dispose of her body. A few years after the trial, McNeil suddenly claimed he knew who really killed Janelle. According to his new story, it was a man who had been selling him drugs. McNeil said that on the morning of the murder, he was at home when this man and his wife showed up. The man told him there was a body in his trunk and ordered McNeil to get rid of it, threatening to harm him and his wife if he didn't comply. Scared for his life, McNeil did as he was told. He moved the body into his own car, wrapped it in a tarp, and took it to the waterfall. He also claimed he wore medical gloves while doing this, But the detectives quickly pointed out a flaw in his story. There were several of his fingerprints on the tarp, which wouldn't have been there if he had used gloves. Plus, he claimed he buried the gloves in his yard, but when police dug up the area, they didn't find anything. McNeil also named the man he claimed killed Janelle, and this guy was indeed suspected of selling illegal substances. When police checked McNeil's phone records, they found he had been in regular contact with him. However, this only suggested that McNeil was buying drugs from him, not that the man was involved in the murder. In the following years, several more theories about this case emerged, each one more dubious and contradictory than the last. Some media even suggested that Janelle was a secret police informant, claiming that could have been the real motive for her murder. But no solid evidence was ever found to support this theory, or any of the others. On February 1, 2024, McNeil was released from prison early and deported back to New Zealand. He will remain under supervision while on probation, but technically, he is now a free man. Throughout all these years, McNeil has stuck to his story that other people were responsible for the murder. Maybe one day, he'll change his story again and we will finally learn the truth. But until then, this case remains filled with unanswered questions. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.